Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this presentation on the Indigenous Australians and the impact of historical events on their culture and society, and how these have informed our teaching and can inform our teaching in the future. I'd firstly like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the traditional owners of this land, of the Kulin Nation, on which this meeting takes place. Our presentation will look at the Indigenous Australians who served in wars during the 20th century and how their treatment post-war was less than ideal. We will also look at an analysis of government policies that have been established since colonisation to this very day that were highly prejudiced and discriminatory towards the Indigenous people. This information can inform students, teachers on the less glamorous side of Australian history, and this can help us build towards a culture and society that is united and connected for all Australians. With this presentation, we want to have that focus on past events, that effect that it's had on the Indigenous people, and then how we in our educational parameters can affect our teaching and promote positive practice and inclusion. Firstly, it is important to establish a context on which we understand the relationships and the living conditions of the European colonists and the Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people existed. In the 18th century, in the first encounters, there were large arrays of land seizure and deaths associated in the conflicts. The European colonists declared the Australian land as terra nullius, or no man's land, so no one owned it. This saw many European colonists claiming land that was Aboriginal by right and by birth. They introduced foreign animals and cultures and diseases which ravaged the land of the Indigenous. The government set in policies such as the Native Institute or the Protection Act. These were aimed to assimilate the Indigenous Australians into this white society. There were many churchgoers or other people who felt pity for the Indigenous Australians. They thought that the way the Aboriginal on Torres Strait Islands was primitive and uncultured, and they attempted to re-educate them. And this was all deemed as a reasonable approach because the colonists' way was seen as superior and ideal as to those of the local inhabitants. With the introduction of the World Wars in the 20th century, this provided the Indigenous Australian people a chance to fight, to earn an income that was equal to that of the white colonists, and also a chance to adventure out and explore the world. While this was a great opportunity for some Indigenous Australians who wanted to defend their country, this was made a lot more difficult with a government act, the Commonwealth Defence Act of 1903, which essentially meant Indigenous people could not serve unless they had a substantial ethnicity or origin. Their origins were directed to European roots. Now, despite this, there were many Indigenous Australians who were able to enlist despite this adversity. In World War I, there was 1,000 who served, as reports go, and in World War II, there was 8,000. These soldiers fought bravely throughout this period, and upon return, they did not receive the appropriate treatment. We found that in reports, unfortunately, many of the Indigenous Australian people were denied entry into wartime clubs such as the RSL. Many were not provided with the proper burial that was given to all soldiers on their returning. Many saw welfare agencies manage the pension and the wages these Indigenous Australians had earned. They found that even in parades, some were banned or not included due to that ethnicity and that evident discrimination within the culture. These soldiers who had fought bravely found they walked back into a culture that didn't accept them for who they were. One Indigenous soldier quoted, "I thought it would be different when we was back." But that wasn't the case. They were treated poorly, they were treated differently, and they weren't recognised for the war efforts that they contributed. So why is this all important? It is important because the Indigenous Australians, they were provided with hope when war arose. They had opportunities that they never thought would have been possible to them. Equal pay, chance for promotion, these are things that shouldn't even be an equation, but given Australia's discriminatory culture, this was something different and new for them. However, after war, this is not what they received. And our students need to be aware of this, that they were not provided the same opportunities and grace as other soldiers returning from war. Ever since colonisation, this distinct separation between the cultures formed this paradigm of a cultural other. There was the new European ideal way, or there was this primitive, outdated, Indigenous affair, and that's how it was seen in Australian culture. Our students need to understand that there's so much more to it, that the ways of living, people live in different ways, there are different cultures, and within Australia, that's great. We need to do more than just simply tolerate or nod our heads to that. We need to be able to accept those cultures and have them integrated and ingrained together for that cohesive culture, that one Australia. Students can embrace this and learn about this, and then they can take this attitude into their life, into their surroundings, and they can then be the influence into other cultures and other societies, into this idea of unifying Australia. Secondly, injustice, it exists, even though it is not always reported, as many injustices acted upon the Indigenous Australians weren't reported until many years after. This is something our students need to acknowledge, that there were some terrible things that did happen to the Indigenous Australians. Many of them volunteered, some enlisted in war for a country that didn't care for them. And when they returned, those who had entered war found a new home, and by reports were accepted and they felt at home, and yet coming back to Australia, this was not what they received. This social switch is something our students need to explore, how the Indigenous Australians are an integral part of our society, and that we need to respect and accept, otherwise injustice will continue. In our education sector, what we need to be doing now is delivering an anti-bias curriculum that looks at respecting all cultures, all people, and not avoiding things. We have the introduction of great days like Mabo Day or Nadok Week, and these things highlight some of the great and just crucial things that the Indigenous Australians have done over the last many centuries. But this is not enough. If our students are learning that simply highlighting this as a once-off or just 1 week, this shows to them that they are learning this is a little part of Australian society, something that is good head knowledge, but it's not teaching them to ingrain this within themselves and within their learning and with how they live their life. The Nadok Week in 2014 looked at the war efforts of Indigenous women and men during that time. It was a great week that highlighted their efforts and their contributions, and the lack of respect and recognition some received. Our students need to understand that as Australians, we are one. We are a collective and we are working together. We need to apply an inquiry-based approach that lets kids move beyond dot paintings and move beyond naming Australian animals. These things are just head knowledge. What we want to do is, in the early years, build on this knowledge, scaffold it as they go through, and this way students are going to be able to appreciate the impact that the Indigenous have had throughout Australia. They know the ways of the land, their ways of communication and socialisation and construction. These are important things that as Australians we need to understand. And in our classroom, this is what we want to promote. We want to promote an open look at everything that pertains to the Indigenous Australians. We don't want to focus on what is being brought from the Western civilization. We want to see how the Indigenous Australians are not just seen on one side of the fence and the European settlers are seen on the other. We want to teach our students that they can ingrain and incorporate this learning and this knowledge together. And this starts with us teachers building that bridge.